Hello. I'm Bianca. It's really nice to be here today. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start off with a couple things. First, I'm going to say that I really enjoy chances like this to think out loud with you. So this is a bit messy. It's going to get a bit dark, but it'll get light again. I'd like to also say that it's hard right now for me on some days to do this work thinking about technology in cities when the world is literally on fire. And there's an urgency to some of the issues that we're looking at, in the environment. The world is also on fire politically. It is getting very ugly right now out there. And so I take both this time and our time together really seriously, and I also want to let you know that if you have anything else you need to do with your time right now, please feel free at any point to get up and leave. I won't be offended. I know we've all got stuff going on, so I just want you to know that I won't chase you down and ask you why you left. But I really think that we're all doing very important work in our lives, and I just think there's an equity that we should all have for each other in how we spend our time together. So before I get into the few little things I'd like to share with you, I'd also like to say that as sort of ongoing work in reconciliation, I have a little story to share. I don't know about the land here. That'll be part of my homework when I go home. Ideally would have known. But I do work in policy and data policy and technology. I've got a few different parts to my background that I'll tell you about, but I wrote a paper in the last year talking about how we should be managing our data. Data is a big topic right now in cities and urban planning and everything else. And part of the paper talked about how we could manage our collective data. I think a lot of us think about our individual data. A lot of our laws are set up that privacy is an individual thing. But what we have in Canada as of 1998, it's something called the First Nations Information Governance Center. And so in Canada, we have over 20 years of history of one group of people, of First Nations people, who have decided to take ownership and control of their data and to use it, in a way that supported their communities and their lives. And as I was doing this research, I included a little piece of that in my paper. And then when I was almost done my paper, I looked at it and I said, if this was about China, I wouldn't put a paragraph in and just keep going. And I think in this sort of understanding and spirit of nation-to-nation thinking and learning, I took it out of my paper because I wasn't sure it was my piece to tell, nor did I think I understood it well enough to do so. So I'm just sharing that with all of you because I think it's really, really critical that as we think about building our cities and sharing knowledge and culture and customs, if we're really serious about reconciliation, we have to interrogate everything we're doing right now, including how we're building our cities. So I'm not sure if I did the right thing with that or not, but I'm still trying to sort of adapt and learn how we use different types of knowledge and information in our work. So it's great that I get to share a few things with you after Matthew spoke, because I'm here from Toronto, and I am going to share with you sort of a resident perspective on a city building project, and one that I've been doing some advocacy around. Has anybody here heard of the Sidewalk Labs project that's happening in Toronto? Has anybody not heard of the Sidewalk Labs project that's happening in Toronto? A few hands, okay. Very, very quick backstory. It's nice that Cogswell's 11 acres. In Toronto, there's a 12-acre piece of land called Quayside. It's part of Toronto's eastern waterfront. And Sidewalk Labs, which is a sister company to Google, is spending $50 million US to make a plan for a smart neighborhood on this plot of land called Quayside. Just a plan. $50 million is going into making a plan. No land is changing hands. And I have been living that process for the last year. So I just want to share a few thoughts about that and sort of see how they might be helpful in both what's going on here and more generally. The first thing, so I've got five things to share from that. The first thing is something that Matthew touched on. It's perfect segue to this work, is that there's a narrative right now. There's this economic development narrative going on in cities, which is that we're going to do innovation and we're going to grow by having technology companies here, and that's going to be the way out of our slow growth in cities. That narrative in Toronto and in Canada for this project has completely taken over what's going to even happen with this project. So there are these two narratives going on. One of them is, let's do smart city stuff because it's great for jobs and great for the economy. The narrative that I'm paying attention to is what does it mean for the people who live in the city? And I just want to share that that narrative is not being the political attention. This is not being what anybody's paying attention to, is what does this mean for people who live here? The entire narrative has been, this is going to be amazing for the city. Because what? I'm not sure. So this story, the sort of backup story to this is that I've been spending a year working with people thinking about how do we set up, resident advocacy and activism to manage this project. Because we don't come together as technologists and urbanists. There is no such resident group. So we've been trying to start building that out. And so as we were sort of working on how to respond to some of this, I learned a really kind of sad lesson, which was that, I was coming forward with data, information, and some ways to try to engage politically. And I realized that the mayor and the prime minister both just thought this was really cool. Okay, right? All right, so this bit high school-ish, not sure what we're doing. And I learned a new word called lobbynomics. And this is also really interesting. This is where numbers start appearing, then they appear in the press, and then they're said in the House of Commons. Job numbers, wealth generation numbers, numbers that if you were to try to go back and figure out where they came from, you'd have a really hard time. So just beware of that thing. I'm still figuring out what we're going to do about it, but it's a thing. The second thing that's happened through this project is what I'm calling a significant blurring of the line between the market and the state. Is that you've got a corporation who, if you didn't know any differently, was talking like they were the government. I was at the first meeting for this project, and you had two CEOs, both American, by the way, which is interesting too. The head of Waterfront Toronto, which is a tripartite public corporation, which is tasked with developing the waterfront, and the CEO of Sidewalk Labs. And they were talking about increasing affordability, sustainability, building resilient cities, and honestly, if you were sitting in the audience, you would have thought for sure that they were elected officials, but they're not. This is extremely confusing for a resident. So that's a thing that I think we have to think about. Where I saw this, has anybody been watching the Facebook, the testimony in the Senate with the Cambridge Analytica scandal? Did anybody watch any of that? A little bit? Okay, so just the quick anecdote there, which I think carries over to this problem, is that, Senator Al Franken, I always want to imitate him, but I'm not going to do that. I kind of am going to do it. So he was like, why? How did you not know they were not buying ads for they were in rubles? It was coming from Russia, and it's kind of like one of these okay. And everybody on the internet, as I'm watching, they were like, yeah, get him, Al. Yeah, get Facebook. And I remember sitting at home and I was going, oh boy, Facebook's not in charge of elections, Senator. That's your job. Right? Is that right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And so that was one of those ooh, it's getting a bit weird. So that sort of carries over into this city government situation as well, where this blurring is happening, and I think we're having everybody kind of forgetting what their job is, which is terrifying to me. The third thing that I've seen through this project, it's really interesting to listen to urban planners talk, because we have a long history of private sector urban planning firms doing wonderful work with governments. Some of the people who spoke today are exactly that. What you have when you bring technology companies into a mix is you have a different power dynamic happening. You have urban planners that work in the private sector, and you have urban planners that work at the city. When they meet and they work on stuff together, there's a level playing field. When you have computer scientists that work on machine learning at Google, and you have the city's CIO, they're not on the same level, not because they're not both smart, but because we're talking about a different type of industry and a different type of application. So this is also getting a bit strange in how these interactions are going down and what equity and level playing field looks like, that you would have vendors who are now influencing policy in ways that I think sometimes bureaucrats might not even be following, which is a huge problem. But it's very difficult to sort of put a handle on it. What I can say from it kind of goes back to something Matthew mentioned as well. I was in a room with it was provincial. Some people who worked in public health, And they were telling me, they were so upset. They were telling me that they couldn't get data from between divisions to flag that the opioid crisis was happening. Like they were having such a hard time, even just within government sharing data to do their job, that they couldn't really do their job properly. And this is kind of some of the problems of the inside versus if you think how much data is being collected and analyzed and used on the outside, right? So there's a discrepancy here about who knows what and where. And when I think about this idea of, knowing that there's stuff in the sewers, that just sets off, like some of that might be good. I think there's also a whole bunch of surveillance and a whole bunch of other stuff that could be emerging, depending on the actor who's accessing data. It's never one story. There's always trade-offs and different ways to use data. The fourth thing that I've learned, John Ralston Saul is someone, he has written a lot about Canada. He said something at an event I was at a couple months ago that really has stuck with me. It's that, I can never say authoritarianism, I just did it. Okay, democracy moves slowly and authoritarianism moves fast. The tech sector moves fast. And I think that's a really profound remark to think about and say that democracy moves slowly and we have to go slow with how we're applying technology to both our operations, the cities, the places we live. Although everybody is trying to tell us that we got to go fast because tech moves fast and this is just the future and you just got to adjust and you just got to deal with it. Here we are. We make tech. Humans make tech. We have agency in these things. This is not something that has to run us over. This is something that we can stop and redefine how it works. But that narrative that I talked about at the beginning, that this is the future, people are very, very scared to stand up to the Silicon Valley magic and say, I don't care if I look stupid. I don't like what that is. I might sound like a Luddite, but I actually don't care. I don't think this is a good idea. Building that confidence in residents to be able to challenge some of the things that are coming out from the technology sector is difficult. That's one thing I've been working on for a year. It is hard. People are basically bullied right now, that they're scared to say something about things they don't understand. That's very Silicon Valley intentional. That's not an accident. Politicians are probably the most scared to look stupid if they don't understand something, so they stay quiet. So we have a chill happening now that is extremely dangerous. I said it was going to get dark, right? Are we dark? Okay, so let's turn the corner here onto the fifth thing. Well, first it's going to get a little bit darker. I'm not sure exactly how I said this, but I think it's urban planning and technology is like a hellscape marriage of elitism, privilege, racism, institutional, every problem that exists in one is accelerated by the other. And so I think right now it might feel comfortable or happy to be like, well, we don't need too much technology, we're good with just urban planning. I live in the city of Toronto and I can tell you that the way that urban planning has landed for racialized people in Toronto has been ugly. It is not a thing that people have participated in and seen themselves in the processes. The people who in Toronto generally drive urban planning processes are white and they own land. That's who shows up to meetings. That's who has a voice. That is who City Hall is listening to. That has not led to good urban planning. If you want to talk about really some of the problems in urban planning, we need to be real about those things. Technology accelerates stuff like this. If something's bad, you add technology and you go bad faster. This is what it does. So this is another reason to really put a stake in the ground right now to consider what we're doing when we use any kind of data analysis tools, software, optimization, efficiency, So the final point here, I think the opportunity for us is to reclaim government and to show up and to say to politicians, I want to be part of any kind of planning with technology. I support you slowing down. I support you asking questions. I'm not going to think you're bad or stupid or dumb if you want to get more of an understanding of how this works, because so do I. And I think if we show up, we can start to bring that confidence back. We can also bring a little bit more confidence back to the need for the public service to have a different vision of what technology is and how it could be used in our cities. There's so much opportunity that if the government is in charge of how technology is rolled out and not a vendor, if the city is not being sold to, but if it's instead creating, there's immense amount of opportunity. As a technologist, I want to do that. I want us to know, math and science is not inherently capitalist. We don't have to always be using technology in ways that it is to make money. There's a whole other realm that's available to us. We should be using that as an opportunity. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think we could be building capacity in through education and through other initiatives at our schools. And I hope that that's kind of one of the directions we can go from here. And I hope, as I kind of wrap up, when I hear, these thoughts about Cogswell and that it's 60% done, I spent 5 years running public engagement processes, and I would just caution maybe everybody in Halifax here that if you're having conversations and you might need to walk back some of that, that's okay. This is a time to say, you know what, in a lot of cases, maybe this needs to be left a little more open. That's how you build a bit more a defensible process, is also admitting when maybe something wasn't right. I don't know enough about it to say anything whether the 60% that's done is right or wrong. What I want to say is that the way you frame conversations is incredibly important. And they dictate, what other parts of the future look like based on some of those things that have been predefined. So I just think it sounds like you have this incredible opportunity. There are so few of these, but let's make sure that we're not replicating old urban planning errors, and maybe really, really think, how do we even take opportunities for urban planning as an opportunity for reconciliation, true reconciliation, not just a memento or identification of something in the past, but how do we take some of the other cultures that exist, within the many nations within Canada and apply them to what the future looks like. And I think there's a ton of opportunity there as well. So that's super exciting. So now it's good, right? We're good? Yeah. Cool.